Now, over the last few weeks, I've been asked by a number of students to just go over again what I'm looking for in a well written, studied poetry essay. So I'm going to do that really quickly here, hopefully in less than 10 minutes. Now, nothing I'm saying here is new or innovative. I know a lot of people are feeling the pressure now because we're 5.5 weeks away from the exam. But you should be familiar with all this stuff. So I'm going to go through what I would regard as being golden rules, good practice for writing and approaching the studied poetry section. So the first thing, as I've said over and over again, is you pick the question, not the poet. So like with my students this year, in one school we've done 5 poets, in the other we've done 4 because there's a lot of people not looking at studied poetry in the other school. And we've looked at the 2 Irish poets and 2 female poets. And in the other school, we've looked at Lawrence as well as an option for the dogs. Some of you have got Dickinson ready as well. Some of you have got Wordsworth and Keats ready. I really think it's important that you try to make sure you have 2 poets prepared. Sorry, that you're going to have a choice of 2 poets on the paper. That means preparing 5 poets, minimum. Now, I think that if you get 4, if the 4 are Yeats, Kennelly, Bishop, and Lawrence, or Yeats, Kennelly, Bishop, and Rich, or any combination of those, I think you're going to get 2 poets. But anyway, what I'm saying to you is, don't pick Yeats because you've studied Yeats. Pick Yeats because the question is suitable for you. Too many times students pick a poet, not the question, and they don't understand the keyword in the question, and they go wrong from the start. Okay, so carefully examine the questions and the choices that you have. Next thing I would say is make sure that you understand that every single Leaving Cert poetry question will require you to talk about the poet's style of writing and what they talk about, the thematic concerns. So there will be wording in the question most of the time which will deal with style, and separate wording which will deal with thematic concerns. And the idea is you're going to marry those 2 things together the way a poet does in their work. Sometimes the question won't obviously discriminate between those 2 things, but remember, every single essay that a Leaving Certificate examiner is reading on poetry will expect you to deal not just with what the poet says, but also with how the poet says it. So style and theme. I believe, and I know there are different opinions on this, you need to deal with 4 to 5 poems per poet when you're writing a poetry essay. I believe that 4 to 5 poems shows a good knowledge of the poet's work. I don't believe 3 does, and I know there are people who disagree with me on that. I think if there's 15 poems or 12 poems prescribed for a poet on the course, I just think that 3 is too few. And I think when you're writing about 3 poems, what people tend to do is end up summarising the poem, writing too much about one poem, and there's not enough variety in the essay. I like variety in an essay. Structure is very, very important. Many of you will take the poem by poem approach, which is perfectly fine. You'll hear, bullshit mythology saying, you can't get H1 going poem by poem. Of course you can. Many hundreds of students have gotten H1s going poem by poem. The idea by idea approach, I really like it. We're going to show you an example of it, hopefully in this video or maybe in a separate video. But again, it depends on the question. Some questions lend themselves to the poem by poem approach, some the idea by idea approach. But either way, you have to have an approach. You have to have a structure. What am I going to do? You have to have a plan. Okay? Okay. So when you're writing your essay, what do you need? You need a short opening paragraph which contains proof of planning and establishes some links to connect your beginning, middle, and end of your essay. So let's think about a couple of those things. What does proof of planning mean? Does that mean in this essay, I will address the following poems? Their first poem is... No, it doesn't mean that. It means, in a kind of a natural and fluent way, you allude to or refer to some of the points that you're going to make and develop later on in the essay without going into them in any detail. So give me a sense of, okay, right, I can see this person here is prepared. You don't have to list the points you're going to make. You hear this bullshit from students saying, teacher told me that if I don't mention it in the opening paragraph, I can't develop it later on. Nonsense. You hear people saying, oh, well, my teacher says that if I mention something in the opening paragraph and I don't develop it later on, then I can't score well. Nonsense. The essay will be marked on its merits across the breadth and length of the essay. And what the examiner is looking for is, well, we'll come to that in a minute, but the marking scheme down here is very clear. I think it's important to have links. Like, continuity is such an important part of all writing. And that means that, the beginning, middle, and the end they're not separate entities. They're not like islands of themselves. They're all bridged together. And sometimes you can mention, I don't know, symbolism or, a particular thematic concern, or if you're talking about, say, for example, Yeats and Rich, the fact that they address personal but also social or political themes in their poems. That's the kind of thing you could mention in an opening paragraph, question permitting, because that's going to link together your thematic elements of your poetry, of your analysis. An opening paragraph, I don't want you to write very long opening paragraphs, and I want the opening sentence to be nice and short and punchy and direct. And when I say direct, I mean question facing. I think it's a good idea to open with a quote if you can. If you do open with a quote, make sure that you do two things: source the quote, so where's the quote come from, and the second thing then is to make sure that when you open with a quote that you somehow link it in either directly or allude to it in your opening paragraph. It shouldn't just be thrown up there and then ignored, okay? The OP needs a thesis statement. So it needs to be very clear from your opening paragraph where you stand in the question. So for example, here's a question on Emily Dickinson. Her poems are original, intense, personal accounts of celebrations and despairs. And I need to know from the opening paragraph whether or not you agree with that. So, what's your stance on that statement? The statement will always be a statement in the question. So I need to know what your stance on the statement is, and that needs to be clear in the OP. And when I say, by the way, thesis statement, that doesn't mean that it has to be just all fit like in one sentence. Like, it just in the opening paragraph, make sure that you address the keywords in the question and make sure that I know where you stand on it, so I'm comfortable then going forward. In the development paragraphs, the DPs, I used to call them BPs, body paragraphs. I often refer to them as the RIC paragraphs. You just make sure that you try to write paragraphs or sections where you have separate points that are connected to the overall point of the discussion. So again, it could be just poem by poem, or it could be idea by idea. Just make sure that everything is relevant, informed, clear, and contextualized, and I'll come back to that point in a moment. There is an expectation that you will use quotation in support of points being made in poetry. I get asked these, really, I can't say what they are. These questions about how many quotes you need in a paragraph. I don't know. Many quotes does it take for you to fully develop out your points? I know that if you're just given loads of quotes but you're not developing out your points, I know that's a waste of time because it's like rote learning. I know if you make really good points and you don't support them with sufficient quotation, that's a bad thing. So it's the balance between summary and commentary, that thing here, okay? Summary and commentary. So summary means show that you've done the learning, show the quotation, show the knowledge, but don't tell me the story of the poem. I don't need to know the story of the poem because that's not what the task is. So show me knowledge and marry that knowledge to question-facing, analytical, commentary, which explains why the information you're given is relevant to the particular wording of the question that's under discussion. Make sure you always write a closing paragraph, which refers both to the question and to the key moments or key points developed throughout the essays. I always say, the rules for a closing paragraph are the KISS rules. Keep it short and simple. Don't write a long rambling closing paragraph or opening paragraph. Don't write essays which are, don't stress about the closing. Just make sure you write a closing. Wrap it up. Always remember the importance of the marking scheme, PCLM. You hear all this nonsense about, if you do this poet, then you can't get a H1, or if you go poem by poem, you can't get a H1, or look, what we know is PCLM. Make sure everything you write is purposeful, okay? So maintain a focus on the question throughout. Don't write long summary passages without inserting some reference to the question or contextualization of points. Make sure your work is coherent, good opening paragraph, continuity links, established using, point, explanation, quotation, or relevant, informed, clear, and contextualized, whatever the hell. Just make sure that your paragraphs have those, or sections have those ingredients, and make sure that you address all aspects of the question under discussion. In terms of language, like manage your sentences. There's nothing wrong with writing long sentences. I'm often very impressed by students' ability to articulate themselves in sentences which are multi-clause. But just remember that lots of students, when they write long sentences, they don't keep control of them. The sentences wander. It's difficult to understand what the meaning of the sentence is. So make sure you concentrate on punctuation, punctuating your sentences properly. I would never say write short sentences. Short sentences can be easier to control. Make sure that you reread at the end of each paragraph to eliminate spelling errors. Mechanics is purely spelling. Remember again, you've got loads of time this year. You've got 80 minutes to write your poetry essay. If you're doing poetry and you're going to do, obviously you studied and unseen, you might take, there's 200 minutes on paper too, right? So say if you took half an hour to do your unseen poetry, which I think is a long time, and 80 minutes to do your studied poetry, that still leaves you an hour and a half to do your Othello essay or your comparative essay. It's a long time, okay? In terms of language, we know that this is one of the real areas of differentiation between a very good answer and a very and a less good answer is articulation, expression. So you're going to there's an element of repetition is going to be in any paper 2 essay because there's a key word. I mean, even I was looking at a 2015 discursive essay on privacy recently, and the word privacy was used a lot in the essay, and it was a valid criticism when we discussed the answer, with students. Privacy is used too much, but sometimes you have to come back to the key word in the question. So there will be an element of repetition, but try to vary your vocabulary. In other words, be synonymous. Use words that mean similar things to show that you have command over language, and make sure that you don't just put quotation down for the sake of it, but that it fits with the purpose of the essay. A long time ago, 2,000 years ago, this writer, Horace, a Roman writer, said, "Believe me, you must draw your pen not once, not twice, but o'er and o'er again through what you've written, if you would entice the man that reads you once to read you twice." And I think that's a great quote from a long time ago. Take pride in your work and make sure that you reread your work, because you don't want the examiner to think this person doesn't care about the quality of their expression. So I think those are key elements in a really good poetry essay. Now, what I'm going to do really quickly is go and have a look at a sample. So here's a question on Emily Dickinson, okay? Okay, original, intense, personal, celebrations and despair. So you look here, what have you got? Those are the words that are describing her style of writing. And you see these words here? They're the words that are describing the thematic concern in her poetry, okay? So you can see style and theme, okay? Now, then there's discuss this view, and don't forget that means discursive approach, and that means you don't have to agree with every element of the question, and you don't have to show that every element of the question is relevant to every poem that you're discussing. So that's important, okay? So it's a discursive essay. So show knowledge and show an ability to think and engage with the question. Don't just pay lip service to the keywords in the question, and don't just summarize the poems. Not that hard. So here's an opening paragraph, and I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to kind of critique it, okay? So we go quickly. First of all, the opening paragraph is coming in at 145 words long in length, okay? I think that's over long. I think a good opening paragraph should be punchy, short, direct. I'm going to have a look and see, is there anywhere where this opening paragraph could be reduced in length? Anyway, let's have a look at this very quickly. To read Emily Dickinson's poems is to be intrigued. They are startlingly different from the poems of any other poet on the course. Stylistically, the poems are original, with the use of the dash instead of conventional punctuation, and in the case of at least 2 poems in the course, the deliberate confusion of syntax in order to convey mental and emotional confusion. Her poetry presents a unique view of the world. The facts of Dickinson's personal life are obscure, but a close inspection of a selection of her work clearly delineates a number of general points. Firstly, she was an immensely talented writer. Secondly, she was a normal person who experienced moments of great joy in her life as well as moments of great sorrow. Thirdly, Emily Dickinson was an intense individual who examined life and her own feelings with an almost forensic eye. Now, it's a bloody good opening. It really is a really good opening. But it needs, editing. So let's talk about the strengths. So look here. See this sentence here? Moments of great joy in her life as well as moments of great sorrow. What you're doing there, you're dealing with celebration and despair. Okay? So there you are. You're saying, look, yeah, I agree. Her poems do have moments of great joy as well as moments of great sorrow. And that's your kind of thesis response to this part of the question. Then you see here it says her poems are startlingly different. It says her poems are original. That's a direct reference to the question, which is absolutely fine. Sorry, no, oh, I can't. I might save as. Hold on 1 second. File, save as. Might let me do it now. No, still won't let me do it. Sometimes it lets me won't let me put the arrows in. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so it's original. That's reference in that question, and then you have unique. Okay, so you're saying it's original. There's no doubt about that, and you're being able to vary your vocabulary by mentioning they're unique and startlingly different, and then you have intense and personal. Look, it says here. Normal person experience moments of great joy in her life, moments of great sorrow. That deals with intense. The celebration and despair's intense part is located is linked to that, as is personal. So it's dealing with the question. It's dealing with the question. There's the word intense there, and there's no basic errors. It's well written, and there are continuity links in it. So, for example, the reference to the use of the dash. That's a little continuity link. You're going to bring that in later on and show it in the context of some of the poems. There's a confusion of syntax. You've said deliberate confusion of syntax, which is absolutely a feature of her work, which is worthy of note, and something that you link in later on, showing preparation. So there are really good things in this paragraph, but there are also things that I would say, aren't necessary, superfluous, not needed. So I'm going to just take a little bit of an editor's tool to this paragraph. So what I'll do is I'll take this as like before, and I'll do an after. So I'll just put that commentary in. So strong focus on the question. Continuity links established. Sense of preparation, clear. Also, controlled expression. Those would be, strengths in terms of the opening paragraph. However, let me just change that there. Calibri. Okay. However, there are areas to improve it. So let's go through. Okay. So you see that first sentence: to read Emily Dickinson's poems is to be intrigued. What's that got to do with the question? Question doesn't ask you about whether it's intriguing. Okay, so I'm going to take a hatchet to that, get rid of that, and get rid of all of this. So the sentence is: Emily Dickinson's poems are startlingly different from the poems of any other poet on the course. Now that's good, because that's reference to the question. Okay, then stylistically, I'd leave that whole sentence in there. Okay, and then see this sentence here: the facts of Dickinson's personal life are obscure, but close to spectrum of work until he has that. None of that is needed. That's all superfluous. Get rid of that. Okay, so get rid of firstly. Get rid of she and turn it into Dickinson was an immensely talented writer. Now again, is that needed? Is that something that's referred to in the question? I don't think so. I'm actually going to take that out as well. Right, this unnecessary commentary. So now we're get rid of secondly, obviously. So her poetry presents a unique view of the world. She was a normal person who experienced moments of great joy in life as well as moments of great sorrow. Thirdly, get rid of that. Emily Dickinson was an intense individual who examined life from her own feelings with an almost forensic eye. So I think that is much better. Now that is, the previous one was (145 words long. The edited version is 103 words long. Let's read it and see if it's any better. I'm just going to try and put this all into one page. So get you down here. Emily Dickinson's poems are startlingly different from the poems of any other poet in the course. Stylistically, the poems are original with the use of the dash instead of the conventional punctuation, and in the case of at least 2 poems in the course, the deliberate confusion of syntax in order to convey mental and emotional confusion. Her poetry presents a unique view of the world. She was a normal person who experienced moments of great joy in her life as well as moments of great sorrow. Fix that. Emily Dickinson was an intense individual who examined life and her own feelings with an almost forensic eye. Now, I think that's a really, really good opening. So it's doing all the things that a good opening should do, and is also a little bit of discipline. You know, one of the great lines that was ever spoken to me by somebody I know who's an actual writer, not like me, somebody who talks about writing but who can actually do it. I'm a hurler from the ditch. This person's an actual hurler, published writer. So tighten up. You know, Stephen King, his amazing book, I'd recommend anybody to read it. It's called On Writing. He talks about kill your darlings, kill your darlings, kill your darlings. What he means by that is you write something, you think, oh my God, it's so good. But then you got to reread it and ask yourself, like, is it in any way relevant to what's under discussion? Or, you know, is it unnecessary? You know, less is more when it comes to writing. So that opening paragraph is very good. It's too long. This opening paragraph is better because it contains the strengths of the previous one, and it's tighter, more controlled. Now, so then you go on and you think about your development paragraphs, okay? And I'm going to look at a section here. So this section I'm going to look at is on the poem I Taste the Liquor Never Brewed, okay? Now, so you can see the section is 272 words long. And I've broken the section up into 1, 2, 3 discernible paragraphs. Now, one of them is split by this longer quote. That's okay to do. But I've broken it up into 3 short paragraphs. Each one, that one there, 92 words. This one here is 62 words. This one here is 77 words. So nice kind of 8 to 10 length paragraphs where I'm dealing with one point in terms of I Taste Liquor Never Brewed, and I'm just breaking it up into accessible paragraphs. If I tried to put it all in one paragraph of 270 words, it would look very dense on the page. It would look like it has poor structure. Don't be afraid of splitting your paragraphs up into subsections. Let's have a look at this. Now again, the question, always have the question in mind. So the question is, original, intense, personal, celebrations and despair. So that has to be in this section, okay? I dreaded the study of Dickinson's poetry. I looked at the striking black and white photo of a prim 19th century spinster and thought her work would be dominated by misery and a fascination with the maudlin. Maudlin means, melancholy or sad. And then I read A Taste of Liquor Never Brewed. In it, Dickinson celebrates nature. And describes the great joy she derives from communion with it. Communion means interaction with it. The poem contains a striking and unusual metaphor. There you're bringing in the language. Striking and unusual fits in with original. The liquor, that is the intoxicating wonder of nature. The poet describes herself as a debauchee of dew, reeling through endless summer days from inns of molten blue. Now again, see, there's a really good quote. Now you could have put that like this. No problem at all, either way. I like it the way I had it because of the rhythm of the line. Doesn't make any difference whatsoever. But what you're seeing is integration of the quotation into your expression. So you can't hear, if I was to read that out loud, you wouldn't hear any kind of break in the sentence. It's fluent, it flows when I move from my words into her words. So good use of quotation. This is a wonderfully clear expression of the poet's emotions. The metaphor, again, that's got to do with the language. The comparison between the giddiness brought on by alcohol and the joy nature elicits. There's the joy again. The question was asked about her extreme happiness and despair is particularly powerful. In the third stanza of the poem, Dickinson's attention to detail gives colour and vibrancy to the poem. You mentioned her forensic attention to detail in the opening paragraph, so there's a link there. The alcohol metaphor is continued, and the intensity of the celebration. Why am I mentioning intensity? Because that's in the question. Why am I mentioning celebration? Because that's in the question. Reaches an excited climax. When landlords turn the drunken bee out of the foxglove's door, when butterflies renounce their drams, I shall but drink the more. And there's that exclamation mark we associate with her so much. The intensity of feeling expressed in I Taste Liquor Never Brewed is a typical feature of the poetry of Emily Dickinson. Again, intensity of feeling, referencing the question. The joy she derived from nature, you're then tying it to another poem, which you're not going to talk about in huge detail, but you're showing knowledge from, is also reflected in the incredibly detailed poem A Bird Came Down the Walk, in which the poet photographically captures the bird's velvet head. That's a quote. With its rapid eyes, that's a quote. Like frightened beads, that's a quote. However, the intensity of Dickinson's poetry is often far from celebratory, and the atmosphere becomes one of despair. And that, guys, is what we call a continuity linked sentence, moving from one point into the next. So you can see there in 272 words, what have I done? Let's go back to the question. I've shown, through looking at one kind of anchor poem, but bringing in a second one to show knowledge of that, why I think her work is original, why I think her work is intense, and why I think her work is celebratory. I think I've done a good job talking about what makes her work original. I think I've done a good job opening in a little bit of a, in a kind of a quirky way. I dreaded studying her work. I thought it would be all dark and depressing, but then I read A Taste of Liquor Never Brewed. So that's an interesting way of moving into that, aspect of her work being celebratory, while we think of her as being despairing. Excellent use of quotation in the section. So there's one quote there, two quotes there, and then you're bringing in 3, 4, 5 quotes from the second poem that you're showing has knowledge of. Is another example of her celebration. You don't mention the word original in there, but you have got your reference to the fact that she uses striking and unusual metaphors, and that is a reference to her originality. You do mention the intensity of the celebration, and you do mention the fact that her work is incredibly detailed, and again, that is something that you mentioned in the opening paragraph, and it's a nice continuity. So that's very strong response, really strong response, nice voice, personal engagement from the student without them, talking about how Emily Dickinson's poetry changed my life. It's nothing to do with the question. Good focus on the question. Are there areas to improve? Well, yeah, there are areas to improve. The commentary could be a little bit more detailed. I'm sure some teachers would like a little bit more analysis of what makes the work original. I'm sure some teachers might like you to develop why it's intense a bit more, sentence or two more. But that's very, very, very strong standard response there. And what I think I really like is the connection then from the end of this section, which dealt with 2 poems, into the next section, which deals with the darker poems. So there's a real sense of the baton being passed smoothly between the 2 sections. And I'm into I Felt a Funeral in My Brain, which is not a celebratory poem, again referencing the keywords in the question. This poem is extraordinarily original, again referencing the keywords in the question. Different and unusual and striking. Now again, a teacher might say, well, why do you need different, unusual and striking if you're saying original? I think it's good to show engagement, enthusiasm. I think it's good to, show a varied vocabulary. But again, if you wanted to just leave out original and put in unusual or different or striking, that's fine as well. Lots of English teachers have very strong prejudices about the way we write. I want you to write from a point of view of being informed, being organised, and crucially, being enthusiastic. The poet imagines a funeral, and now again, watch how I show knowledge of the poem without summarising the poem. The poet imagines a funeral taking place in her brain, with mourners treading till it seemed that sense was breaking through. Lovely quote integrated with my sentence. The poet memorably captures the depressed emotional state she's endured and which she felt was a signal for a mental collapse. The poet imagines them lift a box and creak across my soul. The intensity of the description here again is startling. Okay, again, you're into intensity, you're into that aspect of the question, and is again achieved through the use of an unusual metaphor. Now again, you've shown knowledge, and now you're into the analysis part. Look at the analysis part. The poet imagines herself lying prostrate in a coffin. She despairs, feels wrecked, solitary here, and in the final stanza presents an intense insight into a moment of great personal pain. So personal pain, personal is in the question. The moment when emotional control is lost, when a plank in reason broke, is a moment of terror. The poet brilliantly elicits this feeling with yet another vivid and visceral metaphor. You can see the continuity link throughout the essay is her use of symbolism and metaphor, which captures perfectly her despair, the despair she endured. And I dropped down and hit her whirl at every plunge and finished knowing then. It is apparent that Dickinson endured mental and emotional distress, reference to the question, in her life. I felt a funeral in my brain as an attempt by the poet to reflect on the overwhelming melancholy that engulfed her. However, Dickinson would not be a great poet if she did not delve deeper into the philosophical lessons to be learned from her experiences. The result is her teaching poems such as Hope is the Thing with Feathers, A Certain Slant of Light, and however, I think the most profound Dickinson poem I have read is After Great Pain, a former feeling comes, and now you're moving into the next section of your essay. So you have, let's just do something really quickly here. Sorry now. 2 sections which deal with 3 poems. And those 2 sections are coming in at 564 words. Add to that an opening paragraph of 100 words, 664 words. And now you're going to write 300 words or so, maybe 400 words or so, of analysis of 2 or 3 of these other poems that you've mentioned, and a closing paragraph. So I think that's a very good example of how you write poetry essays. You're displaying you have a real structure. This essay is going poem by poem, but it's question facing. It's idea by idea at the same time. Because I started off with 2 poems that show her celebratory tone. And now I'm going into, then I show a poem which shows her despair. And now I'm going into a poem which shows her learning from that despair. So all of those things are great strengths in a good poetry essay. So I hope that makes some sense, and I hope you find that in some way useful. Let me know if you have any feedback on it. Thanks a million, folks. Good luck.